Delighted to be joined today by Michele Mickelson. Today, Michele is the head of people at Lakera, the Gen AI security startup and creators of Gandalf, the InfoSec game. Prior to Lakera, Michele has led people and talent teams at a number of high-growth Silicon Valley businesses, including Alto, Fair, and Weeby. Before those, Michele worked on the other side of the fence as a headhunter. Welcome, Michele.
Thank you, Patty. I'm so excited to be here today.
Awesome. Michele, to kick off, every great career has got a unique story. I'd love to hear a little about yours. What was the first job that you ever had?
Yes. My job, Patty, was super magical that I had right out, actually in high school. I worked at a small cheese factory tucked away in the countryside of West Marin. So I'm from California, based in the United States, and it's just this beautiful countryside. And it's the kind of place where time slows down. You know everybody's name. The fireman next door came for sandwiches every day. And I started in the retail shop and I handed out samples, making sandwiches, packaging cheese, and giving tours. And that's where actually I got my first foray into public speaking. I learned how to tell a story, engage an audience. And then became an expert in French cheese along the way. So it was still one of my favorite jobs that I've had.
That's amazing. That's the best answer we've had so far for that question. So, okay, great. So you end up in how do you go from working in a sort of cheese factory to the top of, what were the pivotal moments that took you from the cheese factory in California all the way to Gen AI security startups on the West Coast and in Zurich?
Yeah. So I did go off to college after the cheese making experience. And going up the mountain is not always vertical. There's twists and turns around the mountain. Going up the mountain has really been a real experience. Honestly, hasn't always been about what you know, it's who you know. And that's definitely been true for me. I graduated from college a little bit lost. I thought I was going to graduate school, but I lost my brother and everything shifted. And that kind of the loss makes you realize how much community really matters. And my brother, he lived in San Francisco. He was always trying to pull me. Went to school in this nice, quaint little town in Davis. He was always trying to pull me back to San Francisco. And that's where we are kind of really born and raised. And he's like, Michele, listen, I'm starting a startup. I'm moving to Phoenix. I'm going to give you my great apartment to live in. And so for free. And it was in this amazing spot where you want to be right out of college. It was called the Marina District in San Francisco. So he gave me his apartment and I was like, I just need to lock in a job next. Well, a family friend reached out and was like, listen, I have this great agency that's looking for a recruiter. And I'm like, well, I'm not very familiar with recruiting, but I took a leap. I joined the largest recruiting firm in San Francisco. And it was really like an intense boot camp when I joined. I'm not going to lie. I did a few times crying in the bathroom. I worked in a bullpen environment. Everybody listened to your calls around you and everybody had feedback from you. And then it was always like, get on the phone, Michele, start dialing for dollars. And I just wanted to run away because I was like, all this rejection. But I was told, you just need 1% and that says yes, and you'll do quite well. Well, it turns out that I ended up closing the largest deal in their history. And I got a paycheck, Patty, that was 6 figures. I was fresh out of college, 6 figures. I was like, wow. And it was the .com, craziness. And so I did the math and I was like, well, you know what? I actually do this on my own. So I recruited an old high school friend. We worked out of my brother's apartment. And that's how the Coit Group was started. It was a search firm that we started and we, got experience of like running my own company. And it was super exciting, obviously, again, like the journey up the mountain, it's, twists and turns, but super excited. It was a successful company. And that's how I really got into recruiting.
Oh, that's awesome. That huge placement that you did, what kind of role was it? Who was it?
It was a CTO for a tech company that's no longer around.
Okay.
But I think their first annual salary was like, and back then, 20 years ago was like $250,000. So for me being on the recruiting side, that was a huge paycheck.
Mm. I mean, that's still more than a lot of CTOs get in the UK,
That's true. That's
unfortunately.
true. It
There
was
we
very
go.
good.
Yeah, amazing. That's a great story. So from cheese factory to sort of placing CTOs in a matter of no time. Thinking back across your career, obviously you've been involved in a lot of awesome businesses. You've seen a lot of, the ups and downs of the tech boom over the last kind of, few years. In all of that, who's the favorite hire? What's been the favorite hire that you've ever?
I mean, there's so much to unpack on that question. I mean, I've made a lot of really good hires. But, I'd like to talk about one that, wasn't like the pedigree background, one that wasn't typical. And to be honest, we were we hired this person that was one of our leaders in engineering. And that person had everything, the pedigree background, the logos, and that person didn't end up working out. So we had to replace that person on the team. So the person that replaced him wasn't the most obvious choice on paper. We were hiring for somebody that, obviously this role was super important, leading our engineering team. We needed somebody that had depth, grit, was able to function in a high degree of ambiguity. And we were, interviewing a ton of really strong candidates, but nobody really had that spark. So this candidate came in quietly confident and non-traditional background. And we definitely did not think that we were going to move forward with this candidate. Didn't check all the boxes, but it was something really about the way that they thought. And they asked questions that we weren't necessarily thinking about for the role. And they were looking for a challenge. They weren't looking for a title. And so we took a bet and it paid off. They ramped up, very fast, built the foundation from the team. They were a real cultural force on the team, mentoring, leading with humility, and really setting the standards for others on the team. And that person really wanted the job. They worked hard, had high EQ skills, and really had empathy and cared. And the engagement scores from that team were super high after we hired that person.
Amazing. In terms of kind of that hire, what was it that stood? I mean, obviously you've mentioned the questions there, but what was it that kind of really got them over the line? When was the moment that you knew, okay, we're going to hire this person?
You know, I think based on the person that we had before and kind of compared them to this new person, that was very different. We decided to take a chance on someone that was not actually checking all the boxes, was a little bit unique and different. But the things that we saw that, we really liked, again, was the caring, the empathy, really, they really wanted to come in and, roll their sleeves up and get their hands dirty. And that's what you really need at a startup.
Makes sense. I guess this kind of brings us on neatly to this question as well. Is like, in your experience of hiring, what's the difference between good and great?
Yeah, that is a very good question, Patty. So a good hire, they get the job done. They're competent, they're easy to work with. At this stage, we don't need good, right? At least the, startup stage. As you grow, you'll have a lot of very good hires. Right now, we need great. So I have an acronym for great. So for great, G in my mind stands for growth minded, R for resilient, E for engaged, A for adaptable, and T for team focused. A great hire really changes the game. They raise the bar. They take ownership. They spot problems before they surface, and really lift up the team. They don't just fit your culture, they evolve it. And you can see like a big difference between good hires and great hires. The great hires have stamina, self-awareness. They have a toolkit to kind of like help pace them along their way. And, they're real. They're not perfect, but they build trust really fast.
That's a really good framework. I love that. That's really, really great. That's really interesting that you said there about the building trust fast. We've had a few people on this show, and one of the things that's kind of gone back and forth a little bit, and I don't think there's a clear answer to this, is like, how quickly do you know when someone's great? There's one church of like, actually as an individual, you should start, just observe, don't try and do anything, really kind of learn the culture and then start to kind of make changes. And then some folks are more like, hey, day one, you need to ship something, you need to get something done. When somebody turns up and they are great, what has been your experience? Like, what does that look like? What does that first early period of them being in the business look like typically?
Yeah, I think that their first days on the job, they're really kind of coming in, they're listening, they're understanding like what is really important to the company. And what I've seen in past hires that potentially are good is they're coming in, they're making quick, have decisions without understanding the culture and how we work. So great hires come in, they listen, they are engaged, they're taking notes, they're able to make decisions quickly because that's important, obviously in a startup. You're able to make decisions quickly, but you have to really be open to listening to what is important to the company. And so, they have to be able to execute too. And I think that after able to execute, they are able to really kind of build that trust and awareness with the team.
Thinking back to the different roles that you've looked after, and I know we've worked on some together and thought about a number. What are the what would you say is the most difficult or the most challenging role that you've ever had to work?
I just have a little bit of recency bias right now in the role that I'm working on right now, which is the head of sales. It's a little bit like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, where, you have the various options, like just nothing is right. And so I would say that right now we're working on a head of sales role. And to be totally transparent, we've had this role open for a year. We're on our third retained search firm for this role. This role was started open before I started, and this is not untypical for the stage we're at and the companies that I join on like a Series A. We're creating a new category. So oftentimes you can't find that perfect person that has all the skills that you're looking for. And I think that's a little bit what we're looking for. Right now, we're looking for, does this person have the right logos? Does this person know what really good looks like at a top company? Does this person, can they, come in and work at a scrappy startup with a lot of resources? And so I would say that that's what makes this role particularly hard that we're working on right now is that we just haven't found someone that's checked all the boxes and really also going to be a cultural add to our company.
Sense it is a super hard role, and I think it's one of those roles that most startups get wrong at least once.
Yeah,
And the thing about a VP of sales is that if and when you get that hire wrong, you burn a year, right? Because it takes you 3 to 6 months to find them, then onboard them. Then they're in role for a few quarters. You give them a bit of time to see, hey, maybe it's just the learning curve, maybe it's the market, it's an enterprise sale, it takes a bit longer. And then by the time you realize it's not working, you've lost a whole funding round almost. So it's definitely
absolutely.
a challenging one.
And that's why we're okay taking our time on filling this role and finding the right fit.
Yeah, it makes sense. On the other side of that, like when hiring does go wrong, when we do get it wrong, when we do make sort of hires that aren't great fits for whatever reason, is there like a common denominator? Is there like a sort of common experience that you've seen over the years that, why people fail typically?
Yeah. And sadly, I've been doing this so long, I can spot it pretty quickly now. And sometimes I get tricked in the interview process too. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I'm not a robot. I'm a person and we make mistakes as, people leaders, talent leaders. I would say some things that I've seen over is we have certain, I would say even ICs to leaders, they come in and they're excited about strategy, but oftentimes the role is 80% execution. And you unfortunately can't just be focusing on strategy and great, slide decks. You have to get in there and actually do the work. And, other things, and personally, this happens that I see all the time, and I coach my team, I coach leaders on, is you'll notice the candidates that have, new jobs every 2 years. And guess what? They're awesome at coming in and interviewing. They ace the interview because they have a lot of experience. But you also see the people that have like, had jobs that have been in their jobs for 4 to 5 years. And oftentimes they're not the best at interviewing. And you have to really kind of like understand that they might be very good in their roles, but they might not be able to ace the interview. I would say other candidates that have, or employees that started, I've seen that, some of the candidates are super like curious when they, are interviewing, but then their curiosity ends when they start. They stop asking those questions. And then they also, which I love to use in hiring, and I talk to, again, another thing that I talk to the teams about is having high agency. Is really, they need to come in. They need to do things, have not wait for direction and take initiative on their own. And people that just come in and that want direction are not going to really survive at, smaller startups or really even at larger companies. And also employees that struggle with ambiguity is looking, they need, they looking for structure when they need to actually create it. Or there's just like a misalignment with our values and something that we didn't see during the interview process.
That's super interesting about the about people that are interviewing more regularly, being better at it. And I guess like what tools, what questions, what techniques, how do you probe for, hey, is this person actually really great, or are they just a really great interviewer? Because I've been stung by that a few times myself, right? We had one guy came in, he was electric, right? He was a sales guy, he was from SF. He convinced everyone he was amazing. He'd even been on Jeopardy and won it. And then we hired him, and then it came to it, and he didn't show up on his first day. It's the only time it's happened in my career. Went through the whole process to the onboarding. We sent him the laptop. We did everything. First day comes around, like first meeting, expect him to be there, doesn't show up. Second meeting doesn't show up. Sort of drop a text like, "Hey, what happened?" We never heard back from him. And then a year later, realized that he popped up at another business on LinkedIn, was like, "Hey, starting a new job here." And we pinged him and we're like, "Hey, like, what happened?" And yeah, it just turned out that like he'd just been, yeah, like a pathological liar, had like lied all the way through, had done this to loads of businesses. It was absolutely mind bending. But there are some people out there that are just great interviewers. So coming back to kind of your experience, I guess, how do you spot those people that are so good at interviewing?
Yeah, Patty, I want to say that that's never happened to me in my career, but unfortunately, it's happened a few times. I always say to hiring managers, we have to wait, until butts in a seat. Like, we need to, like, we don't know if the person's actually going to start till they start. And so let's keep the pipeline full at all times until the person always starts. But to go back to your question, I think it's really important to do behavior-based interviewing. Behavior is a predictor of future behavior. Really dig in, ask those right questions, probing questions to see if that person has the right experience. And also, it's very important to check references. You need to check references, and especially for a senior role, I would say at least 5 to 6 references to find out, does this, candidate, do they have the qualifications that you need for your company?
Are those references that they would provide, or are these references that you would do?
Yeah, we do a combination of both. We do, obviously we reach out to back channels, which I have, mixed feelings about. And we also do get references from the candidate
Yeah,
during
it
the
makes sense.
process.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think I say there's a big debate. There is a debate in some quarters around like, should you do that? How should you weight them? I think for me personally, I always think about it as like it's a data point. And
Yeah.
the point of a hiring process is to collect as many data points as you want. Some are primary data points that you've collected yourself, and some are secondary data points that someone else has told you. And so I think as long as you weight them all equally, or at least in a measured way, I think it can be a very useful thing to do.
To be honest, Patty, when you work 20 years or 15 years, not everybody's going to give you a raving review. And who knows, like maybe like you've had, like a person was jealous of you or you actually took the job that they wanted. And though, if you do a back channel with them, they're going to give you a poor reference.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think I've got some good ones out there.
Yes, well, there might be a mix in the 20 years,
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
combination of both, like some positive, some maybe not so positive. But yes, you're
Absolutely.
right. Everything, you have to look at them like a data point.
Absolutely. Thinking a little bit more about like advice and sort of like helping people. Um, Obviously, it's a strange time now for people applying for roles. It's competitive. You know, people are kind of frustrated that they don't hear back from companies. There's all sorts going on. What advice would you give for somebody that's applying for a role today, maybe at Lakera or just in general?
Absolutely. I have family members and friends that are constantly reaching out about the same question. I think a lot of people are looking for jobs and they're looking to get into the AI space. So this is the advice that, I give them and I'm happy to share here too, is go deep, not wide. It's, focus on meaningful connections and not just applications. You need to know geographically, like, where do you want to work? Culturally, professionally, do you want to work in AI? What kind of companies do you work? B2C, B2B. Really figure it out. And, once you like know those companies, start applying. And my sister-in-law just, called the other day and she's like, okay, I really want to work at this company. I said, okay, great. After you apply, reach out to the CEO too. You don't need to send a lengthy message on LinkedIn, but send them a note and let them know that you're interested. 5 sentences. Hey, I saw this job. I really feel like I'm a good, fit because A, B, and C. And I think that that really helps you stand out with companies. And, it could be either the, head of people, CEO, one of the recruiters, but, follow up besides just applying. And, I think it's very important to always, stay proactive, and, I heard this on one of my favorite podcasts. One of the hosts said, you need to be like a cement truck where you're always mixing. You need to always be like attending network events. Put yourself out there, talk to new people, because when a new job pops up, they'll remember you and reach out to you and let you know that they're hiring.
I think that's really good advice. You know, sometimes I'll read stuff on Reddit or you hear about people and they're saying, "Oh, look, I've sent 5,000 applications." Or you see those kind of flow charts where it's like, "I've sent 15,000 applications and only one got back to me." It's like, where are you finding 15,000 relevant jobs? Like, there
Well,
must be the case that they're sending just massive, and it really for me has always been like, hey, like as you say, really go deep on what you want and find that because you will be a more compelling candidate for something that you really want.
absolutely. And if you're very passionate about the space, then, it will show.
100%. So let's imagine this person goes deep, they go through the process, they get an amazing offer. How do you advise people on negotiation? Like, how should they do it? How should they think about it? What are the do's and don'ts in your book?
Yeah, in terms of negotiations, first of all, I like to say this to all candidates too, once they get it, because you have a lot of euphoria when you're out, like when you first get the offer. Like you nailed it. It took probably a long time to get the job. But I think it's also important for candidates to reflect, do they really want this job? And if they're unemployed, is this the right fit for them? If they're employed, is this the right time for them to change jobs? Is this the right company? And, I think it's also important for candidates to think about, do they want to be in this job for the next few years? I think that's very important. You don't want to job hop constantly. And I understand like there's situations where there's just not the chemistry or connection in a job. So you want to make sure that this is a place you get along. You do your back channels on the boss that you're working for, that you're going to be able to connect with this person. Do you want to negotiate the offer? Do you feel like it's a fair offer? And, I don't think every offer you need to negotiate. If you feel like it's a competitive offer, you want to start off at the right foot with this company and come in. And if you feel like the offer is fair, then you should just take it. If you honestly feel like it's low, then I think you should have like an honest conversation. Hey, listen, the offer, I was, doing, my own due diligence and found out that the offer is maybe 10% lower than what I expected. And you have to also look at what stage is the company. If it's a Series A, they're not going to pay as much as a Series C company, but they might be able to give you more equity. So you have to find out what is important to you. If you want a higher salary, you need to, figure out like, if it's a Series A company, can they go up that 10%? Or if you want more equity, does it make sense for that company? But it's important for you to also understand the numbers before you go back and just negotiate with them.
100%. I couldn't agree more. Sort of coming towards the end of our time here, what do you wish hiring managers knew about hiring?
Yeah. About hiring or about the recruiting team.
Whatever you like.
Yeah. I would say, one thing I'd like to kind of talk about a little bit of the both sides is that I would say for the team alone, just working on the talent side in an internal company, is that we need to be viewed as business partners. We're somewhat critical to the business and the success of the company. We're not ticker takers. We're strategic partners. I think that's really important. We work with real people, and it's not like we're selling software. We're dealing with human capital. And I think on the other side with candidates is, they're applying and they're like, what is, the people, the talent team doing? I'm not hearing from them. And we care deeply about everybody that applies. We are very thoughtful when we look at applications. We wish that we can respond back to everybody, but unfortunately we don't have the time. And it's just because you apply doesn't mean that your application isn't good. Oftentimes we're looking for like a really niche set of skills. So your application, we might, hold on to it and then reach back to you in a few months if we feel like you have the right skills for the role.
Yeah, makes total sense. Michelle, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time. We've really appreciated having you on and sharing some of your wisdom with us, and really excited to see how Lakera continue to go. I'm sure that it will be another great sort of successful journey. But yeah, so thank you, and until next time, we'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much, Patty. It was great being on.